Hey guys, welcome back to the Atlas Archives Deep Dive series, where we explore in depth the rich and fascinating histories and geographies of every country on Earth. Tonight's episode brings us to the Bahamas, a dazzling chain of islands scattered across the turquoise waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Known for its crystal-clear seas, vibrant coral reefs, and sunlit cays, the Bahamas' landscapes have long shaped its culture, economy, and global identity. In this episode, we'll take a calm, steady journey through the geography, history, and cultural spirit of the Bahamas. From the bustling streets of Nassau to the quiet charm of the Out Islands, from the legacy of the Lucayan people to the era of pirates and British colonial rule, this is a story of resilience, adaptation, and island ingenuity. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where and what time you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see how far this community reaches around the world. And if you're enjoying this series, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a future deep dive. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let's ease into tonight's exploration of the Bahamas. Chapter 1: Lucayan Beginning and Geographic Foundations. The Bahamas stretches across the northwestern edge of the West Indies like a jewel-studded necklace draped across the Atlantic Ocean. This archipelago encompasses more than 700 islands, over 2,400 cays, and countless low-lying rock formations scattered across approximately 100,000 square miles of ocean. Yet, for all this vast marine territory, the total land area amounts to merely 5,382 square miles, a reminder that the Bahamas is more water than earth, more blue than green. The islands form an arc extending over 500 miles from the southeastern coast of Florida to the northern shores of Hispaniola and Cuba. If you were to journey from northwest to southeast across this chain, you would traverse 8 degrees of latitude and 9 degrees of longitude, crossing the Tropic of Cancer as it bisects the Great Bahama Bank and the island of Great Exuma. Together with the Turks and Caicos Islands, they form what geographers call the Lucayan Archipelago, named for the people who would become the island's first known inhabitants. To understand the Bahamas is to first understand its geological ancestry. The story begins approximately 200 million years ago, during the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea. As the massive landmass fractured and continents began their slow drift apart, the collision between the North American and Caribbean tectonic plates created the basement rocks upon which the Bahamas now rests. This was the birth of the Florida-Bahamas platform, a vast underwater plateau rising from the ocean floor. The islands themselves are surface projections of 2 immense oceanic platforms, the Great Bahama Bank and the Little Bahama Bank. These shallow platforms have been accumulating limestone since at least the Cretaceous period, perhaps as early as the Jurassic era. Today, beneath the Great Bahama Bank, this limestone layer measures over 4.5 kilometers thick, a testament to millions of years of deposition. The islands are built almost entirely of limestone in various forms: oolitic limestone, coral reef deposits, and the skeletal remains of countless marine organisms. The very ground is made of life itself, the compressed and cemented remains of shells, corals, and microscopic creatures that once drifted in ancient seas. During the Pleistocene Ice Age, beginning around 3 million years ago, sea levels fluctuated dramatically. When glaciers locked vast quantities of water in ice, sea levels dropped as much as 120 meters below present levels. The Bahama Banks emerged fully above water, creating land masses many times larger than today's islands. When exposed to the atmosphere, the porous limestone underwent chemical weathering, creating the caves, sinkholes, and characteristic karst terrain that defines the islands. This erosion gave birth to the Blue Hole's mysterious underwater caverns that plunge hundreds of feet into the earth, now filled with seawater but bearing marks of their formation in open air. The landscape of the Bahamas is notably flat. The highest point in the entire nation is Mount Alvernia on Cat Island, rising just 206 feet above sea level. Most islands barely rise above the ocean, sitting just a few feet above sea level, making them particularly vulnerable to the moods of the sea. The islands are separated by deep water channels, the Straits of Florida to the west, the Old Bahama Channel to the south, and passages like Exuma Sound cutting through the center. These deep waters, some plunging over 2,000 meters, stand in stark contrast to the shallow banks where depths rarely exceed 25 meters. The Bahamas possesses a climate as inviting as its crystalline waters. Classified as tropical savanna, the islands enjoy warm temperatures year-round, moderated by the Gulf Stream and persistent trade winds. Average temperatures hover in the low 70s Fahrenheit during winter and climb only to the low 80s during summer. Extremes are uncommon. Temperatures seldom dip below the low 60s or rise above the low 90s. This is a land of perpetual warmth, where frost and freeze are unknown and snow has been glimpsed only once in recorded history. A brief appearance in Freeport on the 19th of January, 1977. The rainfall pattern divides the year into two distinct seasons. The wet season extends from May through October, when warm, moist tropical air masses bring brief but intense afternoon thundershowers. The dry season, from November through April, sees drier northeast trade winds dominate. Annual rainfall averages approximately 44 inches, though the southern islands like Great Inagua receive less than 31 inches annually, creating notably drier conditions. The hurricane season, running from June through November, brings the threat of devastating tropical cyclones that have occasionally wreaked havoc across the islands. The natural environment before human arrival was remarkably diverse. Extensive forests of Caribbean pine covered Grand Bahama, Abaco, Andros, and New Providence, the Pine Islands, where adequate fresh water allows these trees to flourish. Elsewhere, low-growing tropical hardwoods and dense coppice vegetation dominated. Mangrove swamps fringed many coastlines, creating nurseries for marine life. The waters surrounding the Bahamas teem with life. Approximately 5% of the world's coral reefs are found here. The shallow banks serve as hunting grounds for barracuda, bonefish, tuna, and kingfish, while the islands supported frogs, lizards, harmless snakes, bats, the agouti, raccoons, iguanas, and the elegant flamingo. Into this geological marvel came the first human inhabitants. Sometime between 500 and 800 Anno Domini, seafaring people began arriving in dugout canoes from the Greater Antilles. They were Taino people, members of the broader Arawakan-speaking family that had migrated northward from South America. These skilled navigators recognized the potential of these islands, the lush woodlands, rich soils, abundant marine resources, and steady rainfall ideal for their horticultural traditions. From initial footholds likely on Great Inagua Island in the south, these people expanded throughout the Bahamas over approximately 800 years. Their population grew to an estimated 40,000 souls at its peak. The pattern of settlement reveals their migration path. Population density was highest in the south-central Bahamas and declined toward the north. From Great Inagua, they moved to Acklins and Crooked Islands, then Long Island. From Long Island, they expanded to Rum Cay, San Salvador, Cat Island, and the Exumas. From Cat Island, they reached Eleuthera, and from there spread to New Providence, Andros, the Abacos, and Grand Bahama. These people called themselves Lucayan, meaning people of the islands, a name that would transform through Spanish tongues into Lucayos, and eventually the English Lucayan. The Taíno word for island, Carey, evolved into the Spanish Cayo and English Cay, words still used today. The Lucayans were part of the greater Taíno cultural world, sharing language, customs, and beliefs with relatives in Cuba, Hispaniola, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. Yet they developed their own distinct island culture. The Lucayans created a society well adapted to their environment. They lived in villages typically containing 12 to 15 houses, called bohíos or caney circular structures, with walls of wood and palm fronds and conical thatched roofs. These substantial dwellings could house extended families of up to 15 people. They slept in cotton hammocks, inventions that Spanish sailors would later adopt worldwide. Their settlements were strategically placed along coastlines, where they could access both sea and inland resources. The Lucayan economy balanced horticulture and marine harvesting. They cultivated perhaps 50 different plants, manioc as their dietary staple, sweet potatoes, beans, gourds, corn, cotton, tobacco, guava, and chili peppers. Plant foods comprised approximately half their diet. The other half came from surrounding waters. The Lucayans were masterful mariners and fishers, harvesting fish, gathering conch and shellfish, and hunting sea turtles. On land, they trapped hutias and captured exotic birds, particularly parrots, whose brilliant feathers they prized for ornamental headdresses. The Lucayans developed into such skilled divers that this ability would later mark them for a tragic fate. These island people were accomplished artisans. They created palmetto-ware pottery from local red clay mixed with burned conch shells. They crafted ceremonial stone seats called dujos for their caciques or chiefs, made tools from stone and bone, wove fabrics from cotton and palm fibers, and fashioned fishing nets that Spanish observers marveled at. Trade was vital to Lucayan life. They carved massive dugout canoes from single tree trunks, vessels large enough to carry goods across turbulent waters. Christopher Columbus himself noted extensive trading voyages, including canoes traveling 260 kilometers from Long Island to Cuba, a journey requiring both courage and remarkable navigational skill. The Lucayans practiced customs that would strike European observers as exotic. They painted their bodies with red, black, and white pigments. Women past puberty wore small cotton skirts, while men might wear loincloths. Both sexes adorned themselves with headbands, feathers, bones, and jewelry. They practiced cranial modification, binding infants' heads to create elongated foreheads, a sign of beauty and status. Their spiritual life was rich and complex. They carved pictograms and sacred symbols in caves, some surviving to this day. These caves likely served both as storm shelters and ceremonial spaces. The Lucayans had created a sophisticated culture with its own language, governance systems, religious practices, artistic traditions, and extensive trading networks. They had adapted brilliantly to their island environment, creating a sustainable way of life that had flourished for 8 centuries. Their population of 40,000 lived across 19 major islands, managing resources, maintaining trade relationships, and passing knowledge and traditions from generation to generation. Then, on the 12th of October, 1492, 3 ships appeared on the horizon off an island the Lucayans called Guanahani. A Genoese navigator in the service of Spain, Christopher Columbus, stepped ashore and renamed it San Salvador. The Lucayans, curious and hospitable, welcomed the strangers. They brought water and food, offered gifts, and showed the openness that had likely characterized their interactions with trading partners for generations. Columbus recorded his first impressions. He noted their olive-colored skin, their unpleasantly broad foreheads from cranial modification, their body painting, and nakedness. He observed they seemed to have no weapons except small wooden spears, and appeared innocent and peaceful. He wrote, "They would make good servants, should be easy to Christianize, and could easily learn Spanish." Before leaving the Bahamas, he kidnapped between 10 and 25 Lucayans to take back to Spain. Only 8 would survive the voyage. The islands held little immediate interest for Spain. There was no gold, no silver, no obviously exploitable mineral wealth. Spain labeled the Bahamas the Islas Inútiles, the useless islands. But the Lucayans themselves would prove tragically valuable. In 1509, the colonial governor of Hispaniola received authorization to import laborers from the Bahamas. The slave raids began in earnest. Spanish ships arrived wielding both enticement and violence. Some Lucayans were lured aboard with promises, only to find themselves shackled. Others were taken by force with sword and lance. The Spanish discovered the Lucayans were exceptional divers, their ability to hold their breath honed through generations of gathering shellfish. Thousands were sent to Cubagua off Venezuela, forced to dive for pearls in lucrative fisheries. The conditions were unspeakable. Bartolomé de las Casas documented that slave ships routinely threw a quarter or third of captured Lucayans overboard. The Spanish could navigate by following the trail of bodies floating in the water. Within 2 years, the southern Bahamas had been largely depopulated. The Spanish may have carried away as many as 40,000 Lucayans by 1513. When the Spanish decided in 1520 to remove any remaining Lucayans to Hispaniola, they searched the entire archipelago and found only 11 people. 8 centuries of culture had been extinguished in less than 3 decades. By 1520, the Bahamas fell silent. No smoke rose from cooking fires. No canoes plied the waters. The islands would remain essentially uninhabited for the next 130 years. The Lucayan people had become the first indigenous Americans encountered by Europeans, and tragically, among the first to be completely eradicated from their homeland. As we close this first chapter, rest knowing that while the Lucayans vanished, their legacy endures in the very name of these islands, in archaeological treasures being uncovered, and in the geographic knowledge they left behind. Their story, though brief and tragic, remains essential to understanding the Bahamas and the complex tapestry of human experience these islands have witnessed. Chapter 2: Age of Exploration and Colonial Transformation. As the 17th century began, the Bahamas lay silent and empty. For more than a century after the Lucayans' extinction, these islands remained largely forgotten by the European powers that had destroyed their original inhabitants. The Spanish maintained titular claims to the archipelago, but with no gold to extract and no workforce to exploit, they showed little interest in actual settlement. The islands became what sailors called the dangerous Bahamas, a scattered maze of shallow banks, hidden reefs, and treacherous shoals that claimed countless ships navigating between the Caribbean and the Atlantic. Yet even abandoned, these islands held value. The wreckage that accumulated on Bahamian reefs became a resource in itself. Bermudian salt rakers, harvesting sea salt from the natural pans on islands like Grand Turk and Inagua, became regular visitors. Sailors seeking shelter from storms found refuge in the natural harbours. And slowly, as religious and political turmoil swept through England and its colonies, eyes began to turn toward these empty islands as potential havens for those seeking freedom from persecution. England formally claimed the Bahamas in 1629 when King Charles I granted territories in America, including Bahama and all other isles and islands, to Robert Heath, the Attorney General of England. Heath, however, made no effort to settle these distant islands. The grant remained merely words on paper, a theoretical claim to lands that remained as empty as they had been since 1520. The religious disputes that would reshape England and ultimately lead to civil war soon spilled across the Atlantic to England's colonies. Bermuda, established in 1609 following the famous wreck of the Sea Venture, had become England's first transatlantic colony to achieve self-sufficiency. By the 1640s, Bermuda was prosperous but deeply divided. The English Civil War that pitted King Charles I against Parliament created bitter factions among Bermudians. Puritan independents who supported Parliament found themselves increasingly at odds with Royalist supporters of the Crown and the Church of England. Among those caught in this religious and political turmoil was Captain William Sale, who had served twice as governor of Bermuda. Sale was an independent in both religion and politics, an adherent of Oliver Cromwell and a man who chafed under the restrictions imposed by those who demanded conformity to the established church. When Royalist forces gained control of Bermuda and began persecuting dissenters, Sale conceived an audacious plan. He would lead the Puritan exiles to the uninhabited Bahamas, where they could establish a settlement based on principles of religious freedom and democratic governance. In 1644, Bermudian independent Puritans sent an expedition to explore the Bahamas, but one vessel was lost and the other failed to find a suitable island. Undeterred, Sale persisted. On the 9th of July, 1647, a remarkable document was drafted and signed, the Articles and Orders of the Company of Adventurers for the Plantation of the Islands of Eleutheria. The name itself was symbolic, Eleutheria, from the Greek word meaning freedom. These articles and orders were extraordinary for their time. Though the preamble acknowledged the sovereignty of King Charles, referring to our sovereign Lord Charles, by the grace of God, King of England, the actual articles envisioned something revolutionary. They spoke of establishing a republic, with a governor elected to serve 3-year terms, assisted by a council of 12 men and supported by a senate composed of the first 100 settlers. The document guaranteed freedom of religion and opinion, promised 300 acres of land to each settler, and mandated humane treatment of any indigenous people encountered. Had Sale's settlement succeeded as envisioned, it would have created the first democratic state in the New World, more than 130 years before the American Revolution. Anyone who contributed £100 to the venture could become a member of the Company of Adventurers, entitled to land that would later be divided into individual lots. The articles specifically stated that all persons would be received and accepted as members of the said Company of Adventurers, notwithstanding any other difference of judgment, under whatsoever other names conveyed, walking with justice and sobriety. Religious disputes would be forbidden in this new colony. Only the authority of scripture language would be allowed to settle matters of faith. Sale sailed to England to secure official permission and find investors. When he returned to Bermuda in October 1647, he brought with him a few English settlers who shared the vision of Eleutheria. In early 1648, approximately 70 people, including women, children, and 28 enslaved Africans, set sail on 2 ships. Sale commanded one vessel, the William, while a man named Captain Butler commanded the other. From the start, dissension plagued the expedition. Butler questioned the entire premise of religious freedom, arguing that it meant freedom from religion entirely. The dispute grew so bitter that before even reaching their destination, the company decided to leave Butler and his followers on an unnamed island, an island that would later be known as Sale's Island, and eventually renamed New Providence. The William, carrying Sale and the remaining Eleutheran adventurers, continued toward their chosen destination. As they approached the northern coast of Eleuthera in the darkness, disaster struck. The ship ran upon the Devil's Backbone, a notorious reef that would claim countless vessels over the centuries. The William was shattered, one man drowned, and all their carefully accumulated provisions were lost to the sea. The survivors struggled ashore, some in a small boat, others wading through the waves, and found themselves stranded on an unfamiliar island with nothing but what they carried. In their desperation, they discovered a massive cave, an opening perhaps 70 to 80 feet wide, offering shelter from the elements. This limestone cavern, which would become known as Preacher's Cave, became their first home in the Bahamas. Here, the exhausted and traumatized settlers held their first religious service, giving thanks for their survival while facing an uncertain future. The cave provided protection, but they still needed food, fresh water, and the means to survive. The Eleutheran adventurers found themselves in a harsh reality far removed from their utopian vision. The soil of Eleuthera proved poor for farming. The survivors ate wild berries, caught fish, and salvaged what they could from shipwrecks. Some settlers, unable to endure the hardship, returned to Bermuda at the first opportunity. Those who remained, perhaps 50 resilient souls scattered across the island, attempting to establish viable settlements, they founded what would become Governor's Harbour, Spanish Wells, and Harbour Island, the earliest permanent European settlements in the Bahamas. Captain Sale, recognizing the dire situation, took 8 men in a small boat and sailed to Virginia to seek help. The journey itself was remarkable, 9 days across open water in a vessel hardly larger than a ship's boat. In Virginia, Sale secured a ship and supplies worth approximately £750. He attempted to recruit Virginians to join the Eleutheran settlement, but Governor Winthrop suggested they remain where they were. Sale returned to Eleuthera with provisions that kept the struggling colony alive. Then came unexpected salvation from an unlikely source. News of the Eleutherans' plight reached Puritan communities in Massachusetts. Fellow religious dissenters, sympathizing with the adventurers' struggle, rallied to their cause. They collected £800 for supplies and sent them to the starving settlers. The Eleutherans, deeply grateful for this lifeline, expressed their thanks in a manner that would have lasting consequences. They filled a ship with valuable Braziletto wood, prized for shipbuilding and creating red dye, and sent it back to Boston with instructions to sell it and donate the proceeds to Harvard College. This gift would remain one of the most significant donations to Harvard for decades, second only to John Harvard's founding bequest. Despite this help, the colony barely survived. The grand vision of a democratic republic founded on the rocks of reality. Internal dissent continued. Economic prospects remained grim. Sale himself eventually left Eleuthera, though he maintained a vested interest and used his influence to secure some trade for the island community. In 1670, he became the first governor of colonial South Carolina, having apparently reconciled his Puritanism with accepting a royal appointment. The utopian experiment of Eleutheria had failed, but it had established the first permanent European foothold in the Bahamas. While the Eleutherans struggled on their island, a more successful settlement was taking root elsewhere. Around 1666, another group of Bermudians settled on the island that Butler and his followers had claimed the island they had named for Captain Sale. These settlers, unlike the idealistic adventurers, were pragmatists. They made their living from the sea, salvaging wrecked ships, making salt, fishing for turtles and conch, and harvesting ambergris. The harbour they settled around was one of the finest in the Bahamas wide, protected, and deep enough for substantial vessels. By 1670, nearly 500 people lived in the settlement they called Charles Town, named in honor of King Charles II. That same year, 1670, brought formal colonial structure to the Bahamas. Charles II granted the Bahama Islands to 6 of his friends and supporters as Lords Proprietors, the same arrangement used for the Carolinas. These proprietors accepted nominal responsibility for civil government, and New Providence, with its superior harbor and growing population, became the seat of colonial administration. The settlement was renamed Nassau in 1695 by Governor Nicholas Trott, honoring Prince William of Orange-Nassau, who had become King William III of England. Yet the proprietors took little active interest in their Bahamian holdings. They appointed governors, but these officials often found themselves powerless to impose order on independent-minded settlers who had grown accustomed to governing themselves. The islands lacked adequate military defenses, and the strategic location that made Nassau attractive to settlers also made it vulnerable to attack. The Spanish, still smarting over the loss of their treasure ships to Bahamian wreckers whom they viewed as little better than pirates, launched frequent raids. In 1684, a Spanish expedition from Cuba burned Charlestown to the ground and carried most residents to Havana. The settlers gradually returned and rebuilt, but the cycle of prosperity and destruction continued. French and Spanish forces raided Nassau repeatedly during the War of Spanish Succession. In 1703, they attacked again, capturing the governor and leaving the settlement in ruins. Survivors fled to the woods or other islands. The new governor who arrived found only a few dozen families squatting in huts and did not even bother to open his commission. Once again, Nassau was effectively abandoned. This abandonment created a power vacuum that would be filled by an unexpected group. In 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht ended the War of Spanish Succession, putting thousands of sailors and privateers out of work. These were men trained in naval warfare and accustomed to attacking ships under letters of marque, legal authorization from their government to prey on enemy vessels. With peace, their profession became piracy. Port Royal in Jamaica, once the great pirate haven of the Caribbean, had been devastated by earthquake and fire. A new base was needed. Former privateer Benjamin Hornigold looked at the Bahamas and saw perfect pirate territory. The islands offered numerous anchorages, hidden coves, and shallow waters where pursuing naval vessels could not follow. The waters around the Bahamas lay along major shipping routes, particularly the path Spanish treasure fleets took from the Caribbean to the Atlantic, and Nassau itself sat empty, abandoned by legitimate government and ripe for the taking. In 1716, Hornigold and his associates, including a young Edward Teach who had become infamous as Blackbeard, sailed into Nassau harbour. They found the town in ruins, inhabited by perhaps 100 civilians eking out a living among burned buildings. The pirates quickly outnumbered the settlers. By 1718, over 1,000 pirates had made Nassau their home. Thomas Walker, the only official representative left in the Bahamas, watched helplessly as the settlement transformed into what would become known as the Republic of Pirates. The pirates established their own rough governance. Edward Teach was elected magistrate to enforce the pirate code and maintain order among the buccaneers. Nassau became a thriving pirate economy, with wreckers, logwood cutters, fugitives, unemployed sailors, free blacks, escaped slaves, smugglers, and merchants of every illicit trade flocking to the island. The pirates formed themselves into the Flying Gang, dominated by bitter rivals Benjamin Hornigold and Henry Jennings. Hornigold mentored pirates like Blackbeard, Sam Bellamy, and Stead Bonnet. Jennings taught Charles Vane, Calico Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, and Mary Read. For several years, the Republic of Pirates flourished. The buccaneers preyed on Spanish ships, salvaged wrecked treasure, and grew wealthy enough to build Nassau into a functioning port town, complete with taverns, markets, and all the infrastructure a pirate economy required. They initially avoided attacking British ships, but this restraint eventually disappeared. When they began threatening English commerce and freeing enslaved people from captured slave ships, Parliament and King George I decided action was necessary. As we close this chapter, Nassau stands at a crossroads. The pirate republic thrives, but storm clouds gather. In 1718, a former privateer named Woodes Rogers has been appointed Royal Governor of the Bahamas and sails toward Nassau with a fleet of warships and an offer from the king: accept the royal pardon and return to lawful society, or face the gallows. The age of colonial chaos is about to give way to something new, and the Bahamas will never be quite the same. Chapter 3: The Pirate Era and British Colonial Period. On the 25th of July, 1718, the pirates of Nassau watched 7 ships approach their harbour. At their head was Woodes Rogers, former privateer turned royal governor, carrying both the king's pardon and the authority to hang those who refused it. The Republic of Pirates stood at its moment of reckoning. Rogers was no stranger to the Caribbean or to the men he now confronted. He had circumnavigated the globe as a privateer, capturing Spanish treasure ships and earning fame for rescuing marooned Scottish sailor Alexander Selkirk, the man whose story would inspire Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Rogers understood pirates because he had lived their life under different circumstances. The line between privateer and pirate was thin, often distinguished only by a piece of paper called a letter of marque. Now he arrived to erase that line entirely. Charles Vane, one of the most defiant pirate captains, had no intention of surrendering. As Rogers's fleet approached, Vane set a captured French vessel ablaze and sent it toward the royal ships as a fire ship, a desperate gambit to block the harbour entrance. The attempt failed to ram the naval vessels, but forced them temporarily out of the western end of Nassau harbour, giving Vane precious time. He raided the town, secured the best local pilot, and escaped through the harbour's narrow eastern entrance with his crew. The message was unmistakable. Some pirates would never submit, but when Rogers finally stepped ashore on the 27th of July, he was not met with unanimous defiance. Hundreds of reformed pirates, led by Benjamin Hornigold, formed an honour guard to welcome him. These men, weary of the uncertain pirate life and tempted by the promise of pardon, had decided to take the king's offer. Among them were men who just months earlier had terrorized Caribbean shipping. Now they stood ready to become law-abiding subjects once more. Rogers moved swiftly to establish order. He organized a government, appointed a council assembly, a chief justice, and a secretary general. Former pirates who accepted the pardon found employment in Rogers's ambitious building projects, repairing the dilapidated fortress, erecting a defensive palisade, clearing overgrown streets and roads. Others joined Rogers's 400-man militia that would maintain order and man the fortress. Cannons were positioned to protect the harbour. The physical transformation of Nassau had begun, but Rogers knew that changing men's hearts would prove more difficult than rebuilding walls. The new governor faced immediate challenges. An unidentified disease swept through his expedition, killing nearly 100 men, while leaving long-term residents mysteriously untouched. 2 of his 3 Navy vessels, having no orders to remain, departed for New York. Ships sent to Havana to conciliate the Spanish governor never arrived. Their crews revolted mid-voyage and became pirates themselves. The third naval vessel left in mid-September with promises to return, promises its commander never intended to keep. Work on fortifications proceeded slowly, with locals showing little enthusiasm for labour. Then came disturbing news. Charles Vane threatened to join forces with Edward Teach, the infamous Blackbeard, to retake the island. Simultaneously, Rogers learned that Spain planned to drive the British from the Bahamas entirely. The governor declared martial law and frantically rushed to rebuild Nassau's defences with whatever resources remained. In September, word arrived that Vane had been spotted near Green Turtle Cay, about 120 miles north of Nassau. Rogers turned to his most effective weapon, reformed pirates who knew their former comrades' tactics intimately. He commissioned Benjamin Hornigold, once a pirate mentor to Blackbeard himself, to hunt down those who refused the pardon. It was a shrewd move. Hornigold understood pirate havens, habits, and thinking better than any naval officer could. Hornigold pursued his mission with zeal. He captured 10 pirates, including Captain John Auger, who had committed the ultimate sin, accepting the king's pardon, then returning to piracy. For Rogers, this was unforgivable. On the 9th of December, 1718, Rogers brought the 10 men to trial before 7 commissioners meeting in His Majesty's guardroom in Nassau. 9 were convicted. 3 days later, Rogers pardoned one who proved to be of good family, then hanged the remaining 8. As one condemned man, Thomas Morris, climbed the gallows, he muttered words that captured the colony's tension. "We have a good governor, but a harsh one." The execution sent shockwaves through Nassau. The population was visibly shaken. Shortly after Christmas, several residents plotted to overthrow Rogers and restore the island to piracy, but the conspirators found little support. The brutal lesson had been learned. Rogers's campaign succeeded in clearing most pirates from the area by 1719. The motto he had adopted became reality: expulsis piratis, restituta commercia, pirates expelled, commerce restored. Pirates who had fled Nassau continued their activities elsewhere in the Caribbean for a time, but the loss of their primary base marked the beginning of the end for the golden age of piracy. In 1718, perhaps 2,000 active pirates sailed the seas. By 1726, fewer than 200 remained. With order established, Rogers turned to governance. In 1729, he issued a proclamation summoning a representative assembly, the first in the Bahamas. From then on, apart from brief interruptions caused by foreign invasion, the government carried on in an orderly manner. The Bahamas had finally achieved stable colonial administration. The islands settled into relative peace for several decades, their economy based on salvaging wrecks, salt raking, fishing, and modest trade. Then came the American Revolution, which would transform the Bahamas once again. In 1776, American forces under Commodore Essex Hopkins launched the first ever amphibious assault by American military forces, a raid on Nassau seeking supplies and munitions. 250 Marines and sailors overwhelmed Fort Montague, then secured Fort Nassau and its garrison of 88 cannons and 15 mortars, though most of the precious gunpowder was evacuated before capture. The Americans occupied Nassau for 2 weeks before departing with their prizes. In 1782, Spanish forces under General Galvez captured the Bahamas, but British control was restored the following year through a brilliant operation. Colonel Andrew Devoe, a Loyalist commander, used an ingenious deception, marching the same small group of men repeatedly past viewpoints to create the illusion of a massive force and recaptured Nassau without firing a shot. The Spanish, believing themselves vastly outnumbered, surrendered. The end of the American Revolution brought the most significant demographic change in Bahamian history. Thousands of Loyalist colonists who had remained faithful to King George III during the rebellion fled the newly independent United States. They came to the Bahamas under favorable terms offered by the Crown, seeking to rebuild their lives in territory that remained British. Among the newcomers was Lord Dunmore, formerly governor of New York and Virginia, who served as governor of the Bahamas from 1786 to 1797. The Loyalists brought with them not only their possessions and skills, but also their enslaved people. The population of the Bahamas tripled within a few years, fundamentally altering the island's character. These Loyalists were diverse in origin and circumstance. Some came from the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida, carrying with them expertise in plantation agriculture. They received generous land grants from the Crown properties on New Providence, Abaco, Exuma, Cat Island, Long Island, and other islands. They brought skills in shipbuilding, carpentry, farming, and various trades. They established schools, built docks, created roads, formed newspapers, and organized police forces. The infrastructure of modern Bahamian society began to take shape. The Loyalists arrived with grand ambitions, particularly regarding cotton cultivation. They had seen cotton succeed in the American South and believed it could thrive in the Bahamas. Plantations were established across the islands, worked by enslaved Africans whose numbers increased dramatically. For a time, it appeared the Bahamas might become a profitable plantation colony. The reality proved otherwise. The thin limestone soil that had defeated earlier settlers now undermined the Loyalist plantations. What little topsoil existed quickly became exhausted. Insects attacked the cotton crops relentlessly. The shallow, poor soil could not sustain intensive agriculture. Within a decade, many plantations were failing. By the early 19th century, most Loyalists who could afford to leave had done so, abandoning their dreams of Caribbean prosperity. Those who remained faced harsh realities. The Bahamas could not support a plantation economy like Jamaica or Barbados. Instead, the islands developed a different pattern: small-scale subsistence farming combined with maritime activities. Enslaved people in the Bahamas generally lived in smaller household groups than on sugar islands, working alongside their owners in fishing, salt raking, and salvaging rather than in vast field gangs. Yet slavery in the Bahamas, though different in scale, remained brutal. Enslaved people were denied basic human rights, subjected to physical and psychological abuse, separated from families, and treated as property. They resisted in whatever ways they could day-to-day sabotage, damaging tools, slowing work, and running away. Some attempted to flee to freedom in neighboring islands or to Spanish Florida. In 1830, a remarkable act of resistance occurred on Exuma. An enslaved man named Pompey, facing separation from his family and sale to a different owner, led a successful revolt. He rallied fellow enslaved individuals and temporarily disrupted the system, demonstrating extraordinary leadership and defying the authority of the enslavers. Though ultimately quelled, Pompey's rebellion instilled fear in plantation owners and inspired other acts of resistance. It stands as a crucial reminder of the unwavering spirit that would not be extinguished even by chains. By the early 1830s, the plantation system in the Bahamas was collapsing from economic failure as much as from moral pressure. When Britain abolished slavery throughout its empire in 1834 with the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833, the Bahamas had already seen most plantations abandoned or reduced to subsistence operations. Some owners, like Lord Rolle at Exuma, gave their land to the formerly enslaved people. The transition to freedom, while legally mandated, often meant continued poverty and hardship for those who had been freed. Freedmen chose to work their own small plots of land when possible, creating settlements that exist to this day. The Bahamas developed a unique society, neither the plantation economy of Jamaica nor the empty archipelago of earlier centuries, but a scattered collection of small communities where Afro-Bahamian culture began to flourish. African traditions in music, storytelling, dance, and spiritual practices blended with European influences to create something distinctly Bahamian. The islands struggled economically after emancipation. Without plantation profits, the Bahamas survived on subsistence farming, fishing, salt raking, and salvaging the frequent shipwrecks on its reefs. The population remained small and scattered. Nassau was the only settlement with any prosperity, maintained largely by the British military establishment and its role as a colonial administrative centre. Then came the American Civil War, and with it, unexpected wealth. From 1861 to 1865, the Bahamas became a crucial link in the Confederate supply chain. Britain's textile industry depended on southern cotton, but the Union had blockaded southern ports. Confederate blockade runners met British merchant ships in Nassau, trading cotton for guns, ammunition, and supplies. The runners then dashed through the Union blockade to Charleston and other southern ports, selling their cargoes for enormous profits. Nassau transformed into a bustling entrepot. The colonial government expanded Prince George Wharf to accommodate the flow of goods. Warehouses multiplied, merchants grew wealthy. The entire economy boomed on the profits of this dangerous trade. Ships that successfully ran the blockade could make fortunes in a single voyage. The risks were high, Union ships patrolled constantly, and many blockade runners were captured or sunk, but the rewards justified the danger. The prosperity was intense but temporary. When the Civil War ended in 1865, so did the revenues. Combined with the collapse of the sponge harvesting industry in the following decades, the sudden loss of blockade-running profits economically devastated the Bahamas. The island sank back into poverty, surviving once again on traditional maritime activities and subsistence farming. Yet the Bahamas would experience another boom, even more remarkable than the last. On the 16th of January, 1920, the United States enacted the 18th Amendment, prohibiting the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages. Prohibition had come to America, and the Bahamas, where alcohol remained perfectly legal, stood just 60 miles from the Florida coast. The islands, particularly Nassau and Bimini, became the center of rum-running operations. British, Canadian, and European liquor poured into Bahamian warehouses, then was smuggled into the United States on fast boats under cover of darkness. Fortunes were made overnight. Bahamian families who had struggled for generations suddenly found themselves wealthy. The colonial government, profiting from import duties and fees, encouraged the trade without technically breaking any laws. After all, selling liquor was legal in the Bahamas. What happened once it left Bahamian waters was, officially, not their concern. Nassau prospered like never before. Hotels were built, infrastructure improved. The upper class lived in unprecedented luxury. When Prohibition ended in 1934, it left the Bahamas transformed. The era had demonstrated the island's potential for prosperity based on their strategic location, and had created a class of wealthy Bahamians who would shape the nation's future. It had also, inadvertently, laid the groundwork for what would become the island's greatest industry, tourism. As we close this chapter, the Bahamas stands poised on the edge of its modern era. The wild days of pirates and the harsh realities of slavery have passed. The boom and bust cycles of blockade running and rum running have shown both the promise and peril of the island's geography. The colonial period, with all its transformations, has created a uniquely Bahamian society, predominantly Afro-Bahamian, shaped by African, European, and Caribbean influences scattered across hundreds of islands and forever tied to the sea. The path to independence and nationhood still lies ahead, but the foundation has been laid by centuries of survival, resistance, adaptation, and resilience. Chapter 4. The Geography of Paradise: Islands, Climate, and Ecosystems. Let us pause in our historical journey to explore the remarkable natural world that has shaped every chapter of the Bahamas story. The same geological forces that created these islands millions of years ago continue to define them today, creating ecosystems found nowhere else on Earth. As you drift towards sleep, imagine descending beneath crystalline waters into a world of profound mystery and stunning beauty. The Bahamas stretches across 100,000 square miles of ocean, yet its total land area amounts to barely 5,400 square miles. This archipelago is fundamentally an aquatic realm punctuated by limestone islands, more accurately described as the peaks of vast underwater mountains. The true geography of the Bahamas exists not on maps showing land, but in the hidden topography beneath the waves. Andros Island dominates the archipelago as its largest landmass, spanning nearly 6,000 square kilometers. If you were to combine all other Bahamian islands, Andros would still be larger. Yet even Andros is not truly one island, but an archipelago within an archipelago, hundreds of small islets and cays connected by mangrove estuaries and tidal swamplands, together with three major sections: North Andros, Mangrove Cay, and South Andros. These are separated by bights, estuaries that trifurcate the island from east to west, creating a labyrinth of waterways where land and sea become indistinguishable. Andros possesses something unique in the Bahamas, the only freshwater river in the entire archipelago. Underground aquifers collect millions of litres of rainwater beneath the island's porous surface. Each day, 19 million litres of fresh water are pumped from Morgan's Bluff and shipped by barge to Nassau, sustaining the capital's population. This hidden hydrology creates ecosystems impossible elsewhere in the limestone islands, supporting botanical diversity unmatched in the Bahamas. Along Andros's eastern shore runs one of Earth's most spectacular natural wonders, the Andros Barrier Reef, the world's sixth longest barrier reef and the third largest in the Western Hemisphere. This living organism stretches for 225 kilometers, running parallel to the coast at a distance of 2 to 3 kilometers offshore. The reef creates a natural barrier between the shallow banks and the abyss, beyond a division so dramatic it defines the island's entire eastern character. On the landward side of the reef, the waters remain shallow, rarely exceeding 25 feet in depth. Here, staghorn and elkhorn corals flourish in waters bathed in sunlight. Beyond these shallows lie tiny cays and islets where the seafloor gradually deepens. Then, at depths between 70 and 120 feet, comes what divers call the wall, where the continental shelf simply ends. The seafloor plunges 2,000 meters straight down into the tongue of the ocean, a deep ocean trench that cuts between Andros and New Providence, like a vast underwater canyon. The Andros Barrier Reef supports over 164 species of fish and coral, creating one of the most biodiverse marine environments in the Caribbean. Here swim the blue marlin, the national fish of the Bahamas, capable of reaching 14 feet in length and speeds of 60 miles per hour. Manta rays glide through the currents, the largest reaching spans of 23 feet. Nassau groupers congregate in aggregations found nowhere else on Earth. Andros hosts the only location with multiple grouper spawning sites. Rock lobsters hide in crevices. Green sea turtles, which can live nearly a century and weigh up to 700 pounds, patrol these waters. Moray eels have been observed hunting cooperatively with groupers, the eel working from below while the grouper hovers above, confusing their prey. The reef is famous for its deep water sponges and vast schools of red snapper. 4 species of sea turtles nest in Andros waters: loggerhead, green, hawksbill, and rarely the leatherback. The barrier reef and the tongue of the ocean, together with mangrove swamps, rocky tidal pools, and estuaries, provide breeding and growing habitats for countless juvenile marine species. This is where life begins for much of the Caribbean's ocean fauna, but the Bahamas holds even stranger wonders beneath its surface. The islands contain the world's largest collection of blue holes, those mysterious vertical caves that plunge from shallow waters or dry land into darkness. Scientists estimate over 1,000 blue holes exist throughout the Bahamas, though less than 20% have been explored. Andros alone contains an estimated 178 blue holes, more than any other island. Blue holes formed during the ice ages when sea levels dropped 100 to 120 meters below present levels. The Bahama banks stood exposed to air, and rainwater, always slightly acidic, ate through the porous limestone, creating one of Earth's most extensive cave systems. When the glaciers melted and seas rose, these caves flooded, creating the blue holes visible today. They appear as dark blue circles against the lighter turquoise of shallow waters, their color announcing the profound depths below. Dean's Blue Hole on Long Island ranks as the world's 3rd deepest blue hole at 202 meters deep. From the surface, it appears deceptively small, with a diameter of merely 30 meters. But beneath the entrance, it widens dramatically into a cavern, 100 meters across a vast underwater cathedral hidden below the waves. The blue hole sits in a bay enclosed on 3 sides by a natural rock amphitheater and on the 4th by a turquoise lagoon and powdery white beach. Each year, it hosts the Vertical Blue freediving competition, nicknamed the Wimbledon of Freediving, where athletes from around the world attempt to descend into the abyss on a single breath. The blue holes of Andros offer even more dramatic experiences. Stargate Blue Hole consists of a central shaft, 340 feet deep, with passages extending north and south for thousands of feet. At about 50 feet below the surface hangs a layer of hydrogen sulfide, a toxic gas created by bacterial colonies and decaying matter. Divers describe it as a silvery net of faint, swirling cobwebs, hovering motionless in the darkness. Those who penetrate this layer may experience itching skin, tingling, dizziness, even nausea. Below the hydrogen sulfide layer lies black water and the entrance to vast tunnel systems, some explored for thousands of feet, others never seen by human eyes. Some blue holes breathe with the tides. Chimney Blue Hole off Grand Bahama creates an insanely dangerous vortex that sucks down millions of gallons when the tide comes in, like a giant bathtub drain with enough power to pull divers to their deaths. The Lucayans, witnessing these swirling currents, believed the holes were breathing, inhaling, and exhaling with the rhythm of the ocean. These blue holes serve as time capsules, preserving climate and fossil records dating back to the last glacial maximum. The anoxic bottom water prevents decay, allowing organic material to accumulate undisturbed for thousands of years. Scientists have discovered ancient Lucayan artifacts, bones of extinct animals, and sediment cores that reveal the Bahamas' climate history. Some blue holes contain stalactites and stalagmites that could only have formed in open air, proving these caves existed before the seas rose. Individual mineral formations, tens of thousands of years old, hang in the darkness, fragile witnesses to geological epochs. The island's terrestrial ecosystems showcase remarkable diversity despite the challenging limestone foundation. Andros exhibits greater botanical variety than any other Bahamian island. The landscape divides into distinct zones: hardwood coppice in the interior, piñards, where Caribbean pines tower over the landscape, scrub vegetation on poor soils, saltwater marshes along coasts, rocky and sandy beaches, palm savannas, and extensive mangrove forests. The mangrove swamps deserve particular attention. These forests of salt-tolerant trees create nurseries for marine life, buffer coastlines from storms, and filter sediments from runoff. The tangled root systems provide shelter for juvenile fish, shrimp, and countless other species. The swamps, locally called the swash, form a transition zone between land and sea, neither fully one nor the other, supporting species adapted to constant change between salt and fresh water, wet and dry, land and ocean. Bahamas' terrestrial fauna includes the endangered Andros Island iguana, a subspecies of the northern Bahamian rock iguana. Only 3,500 individuals survive in the wild, making it one of the rarest reptiles in the Caribbean. These prehistoric-looking creatures, which can exceed 3 feet in length, represent an evolutionary lineage tens of millions of years old. Various species of lizards scurry through the undergrowth. Harmless snakes patrol the forest floor. Several species of bats roost in the countless caves, emerging at dusk to hunt insects. The avian life reflects the island's position as a crossroads between continents. Most resident bird species likely arrived from the West Indies, carried northward by winds and currents that favor such movement. The Bahamas host flamingos, herons, egrets, and countless shorebirds. Great Inagua Island in the south supports over 80,000 West Indian flamingos in a protected national park, creating one of the largest flamingo populations in the Western Hemisphere. The sight of these birds, their pink plumage brilliant against turquoise waters, has become emblematic of Bahamian nature. The island's climate remains remarkably consistent, though subtle variations exist across the archipelago. The northern islands experience slightly cooler temperatures and more evenly distributed rainfall than the south. Winter temperatures rarely drop below 64 degrees Fahrenheit in the north, while summer temperatures often reach 90 degrees. The southern islands, including Great Inagua and the Turks and Caicos, are warmer and notably drier, receiving less than 31 inches of rain annually compared to over 44 inches in the north. The wet season, from May through October, brings warm, moist tropical air from the southeast. Brief but intense afternoon thundershowers punctuate sultry days. Humidity rises. The dry season, November through April, sees drier northeast trade winds dominate. These winds, combined with the moderating influence of the Gulf Stream, create the idyllic conditions for which the Bahamas is famous: warm days, cool breezes, crystalline visibility in the water. Yet this paradise lives with the constant threat of hurricanes. From June through November, tropical cyclones can bring devastating winds and storm surge. The low elevation of the islands, the highest point in the entire nation, is Mount Alvernia, at just 206 feet, leaves them particularly vulnerable. Hurricanes have repeatedly reshaped Bahamian history, destroying settlements, altering coastlines, and forcing adaptations in architecture and settlement patterns. The waters themselves tell a story of constant movement. The Great Bahama Bank and Little Bahama Bank create vast, shallow platforms averaging 10 meters deep, punctuated by the islands we see. Between these banks run deep channels, the Straits of Florida to the west, the northeast and northwest Providence channels, Exuma Sound cutting through the center. The tongue of the ocean slices between Andros and New Providence like a knife, its depths hosting creatures adapted to darkness and pressure. These waters are among the clearest on Earth. Visibility often exceeds 200 feet, a clarity produced by the limestone filtering and the absence of river sediment. The Bahamas has no rivers except the single stream on Andros. All water that falls as rain either evaporates, gets absorbed into aquifers, or runs quickly into the sea without carrying terrestrial sediment. This crystalline clarity allows sunlight to penetrate deep, supporting coral growth and creating the stunning blues and turquoises that define the Bahamian seascape. Approximately 5% of the world's coral reefs are found in Bahamian waters. These underwater gardens support biodiversity rivaling tropical rainforests. The reefs serve as fish factories, nurseries, and feeding grounds. They protect coastlines from wave action. They create sand through the endless work of parrotfish grinding coral into powder. The beaches themselves, those powder-soft sands in shades from white to pink, are largely composed of pulverized coral and shells, the legacy of countless generations of marine organisms. The Bahamas represents an ecosystem unlike anywhere else, a scattered archipelago where land is the exception and water the rule, where underground rivers flow beneath limestone islands, where vertical caves plunge hundreds of meters into darkness, where barrier reefs create walls at the edge of the abyss. It is a place where geological time remains visible in stalactites hanging in flooded caves, where evolutionary processes continue in isolated populations of iguanas and endemic plants, where the very ground beneath your feet was built by living organisms over millions of years. As you rest tonight, imagine floating in those crystalline waters, looking down into Dean's blue hole as it descends into midnight blue, or drifting along the Andros Barrier Reef as a green turtle glides past, or standing in a pine forest on an island built entirely of compressed life. The Bahamas is not merely a pretty place, it is a living laboratory of geology, ecology, and evolution, a natural wonder shaped by forces both ancient and ongoing. In understanding its geography, we begin to grasp why this scattered collection of limestone islands has captured human imagination for millennia, and why it will continue to do so for millennia to come. Chapter 5: Journey to Independence and Modern Nation Building. The decades following the Second World War brought winds of change sweeping across the colonial world. From Africa to Asia to the Caribbean, colonized peoples demanded self-determination. The Bahamas, with its unique history of slavery, Loyalist settlement, and British rule, faced its own reckoning. The journey from colonial dependency to independent nationhood would be neither simple nor without struggle, but it would fundamentally transform Bahamian society. For centuries, political power in the Bahamas had rested with a small white elite descended from Loyalist families. This minority, though representing less than 20% of the population, controlled the economy, dominated the legislature, and determined who could vote. The Bahamian majority, descendants of enslaved Africans who had built the nation through centuries of labor, remained largely disenfranchised, relegated to second-class citizenship in their own land. The system was maintained through property and literacy requirements that effectively excluded most black Bahamians from voting. Those who could vote faced additional barriers of intimidation and manipulation. Women, regardless of race, possessed no voting rights until 1942, and even then faced restrictions. The political arrangement ensured that power remained concentrated in the hands of an elite who saw themselves as the natural rulers of the islands. Yet change was inevitable. The Second World War had profoundly altered global consciousness. Bahamian soldiers who fought for Britain returned home, questioning why they remained second-class citizens in their own country. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 proclaimed the equality of all peoples. Across the Caribbean, independence movements gathered strength. In Jamaica, Trinidad, and elsewhere, colonial rule faced mounting challenges. In 1953, a group of young, educated Bahamians of African descent formed the Progressive Liberal Party, the PLP. This organization would become the vehicle for transforming Bahamian society. Among its founders was a brilliant young lawyer named Lynden Pindling, who had studied at the University of London and been called to the British bar. Pindling, born in 1930 in Over the Hill, the black section of Nassau, understood intimately the injustices of the colonial system. The existing political establishment responded by forming their own party in 1958, the United Bahamian Party, or UBP, controlled by white Bahamian politicians who sought to preserve their dominance. The political battle lines were drawn not merely between parties, but between fundamentally different visions of Bahamian society. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, the PLP raised the cry for majority rule. Pindling, elected to Parliament in 1956 and soon chosen as parliamentary leader of the PLP, became the voice of the disenfranchised majority. He argued passionately for universal adult suffrage, for equal opportunity, for a Bahamas where power reflected the actual composition of society rather than colonial privilege. In May 1963, a conference in London considered a new constitution for the islands. Britain agreed that the colony should have full internal self-government, with the governor retaining reserved powers only for foreign affairs, defence, and internal security. The new constitution came into force on January 7, 1964, representing a significant step toward autonomy. Further constitutional advances in 1969 brought the country to the verge of complete self-government, and the name was officially changed to the Commonwealth of the Bahama Islands. But it was the general election of 1967 that truly transformed the Bahamas. The campaign was intense, passionate, sometimes bitter. At stake was nothing less than the future character of Bahamian society. On January 10, 1967, the results came in. The PLP had won a narrow victory with the support of 2 independent members. For the first time in Bahamian history, the government would be led by the black majority. Lynden Pindling became Premier, soon to be Prime Minister, and majority rule had arrived. This transition, which could have been violent, proceeded peacefully. Historians would later call it the Quiet Revolution. The old elite, recognizing the inevitability of change, largely accepted the new reality. Pindling's government, while determined to transform society, pursued change through constitutional means rather than upheaval. The revolution was quiet, but it was nonetheless profound. The PLP government immediately began reshaping Bahamian society. They advocated stricter government control of certain sectors of the economy, increasing Bahamian ownership of business enterprises and replacing foreign workers with trained Bahamians. Educational opportunities expanded dramatically. New schools were built throughout the islands. The government founded the College of the Bahamas, allowing Bahamians to access higher education at home for the first time. No longer would only the wealthy be able to afford sending their children abroad for university. Public health measures were introduced across the archipelago. The supply of potable water and sewage waste disposal improved significantly. Healthcare expanded through the establishment of new clinics in many islands, with doctors posted to major population centers. In 1974, Pindling introduced the National Insurance Scheme, providing essential support for citizens facing illness, unemployment, or old age. This social safety net remains vital to Bahamians today. Security was enhanced through the formation of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, giving the nation capacity to protect its territorial waters and respond to disasters. The Royal Bahamas Police Force was strengthened and professionalized. Infrastructure improved as the islands became more closely linked through the establishment of Bahamas Air, the national airline, making inter-island travel more accessible to ordinary Bahamians. Yet the question of full independence remained. Some factions within the PLP and much of the opposition argued that total independence should be delayed, that the nation needed more time to prepare. Others, including Pindling, believed the time had come for the Bahamas to take its place among sovereign nations. The debate was serious and substantive, reflecting genuine concerns about the challenges ahead. Pindling's government moved forward, setting 1973 as the target date for independence. Constitutional conferences were held, preparations were made, and on the 10th of July, 1973, the Bahamas officially became an independent nation within the British Commonwealth. The occasion was marked by grand celebrations across the islands. A state ceremony in Nassau was attended by representatives from around the world, including Prince Charles, who represented the British Crown. At midnight, the Bahamian flag was raised for the first time, black representing the strength of the people, aquamarine symbolizing the surrounding seas, and gold reflecting the bright Bahamian Sunday. The nation sang its new national anthem, March On, Bahamaland, as 325 years of British rule came to an end. Sir Lynden Pindling became the first Prime Minister of an independent Bahamas. He would hold that position for 25 years, becoming the longest-serving elected head of government in the British Commonwealth. Under his leadership, the Bahamas joined the United Nations, the Organization of American States, the Caribbean Community and Common Market, and affirmed its membership in the Commonwealth of Nations. The Bahamas, once dismissed as useless islands, now sat among the family of nations with its own voice and vote. The tourism industry, which had been growing since the end of Prohibition, expanded dramatically. The Bahamas welcomed over 3 million visitors annually, making tourism the backbone of the economy. Nassau and Paradise Island developed into major resort destinations. The out islands, those islands beyond New Providence and Grand Bahama, began marketing themselves to travelers seeking authentic Bahamian experiences away from large resorts. As Minister of Finance from 1984 to 1990, Pindling advanced policies that positioned the Bahamas as a global financial services center. The government enacted regulations that attracted major international banks. The combination of political stability, favorable tax structures, and proximity to the United States made Nassau a significant offshore financial hub. This diversified the economy beyond tourism, creating high-skilled employment opportunities for Bahamians. Yet independence brought challenges alongside opportunities. The Bahamas' strategic location, which had brought prosperity during blockade running and prohibition, now made it a transit point for illegal drug trafficking. By the 1980s, the islands had become a major route for cocaine smuggled from South America to the United States. The drug trade brought violence, corruption, and international scrutiny. In 1983, mounting public concern led to the creation of a Royal Commission of Inquiry into drug trafficking and government corruption. The Commission's findings damaged the Pindling administration. While Pindling himself was never charged with any crime, the inquiry revealed that several members of his government had accepted bribes from drug traffickers. The Commission examined Pindling's personal finances and found that he and his wife had spent 8 times his reported earnings from 1977 to 1984, with at least $3.5 million in bank deposits that could not be accounted for. Though the Commission ultimately cleared Pindling of wrongdoing, the revelations eroded public trust. The perception that corruption had flourished under Pindling's watch became a significant liability. Critics argued that the father of the nation had failed to maintain the moral standards necessary for leadership. Yet even his harshest critics acknowledged his fundamental achievements: majority rule, independence, expanded education and healthcare, and the transformation of Bahamian society from a colonial backwater to a prosperous modern nation. The Bahamas also grappled with immigration challenges. Waves of Haitian refugees, fleeing poverty and political instability in their homeland, arrived on Bahamian shores. The small island nation struggled to absorb these arrivals while maintaining its own economic stability and social services. The issue created tensions between humanitarian obligations and practical limitations, a challenge that would persist for decades. In 1992, after 25 years in power, Pindling and the PLP faced the electorate once more. The Free National Movement, formed in 1972 through a merger of opposition groups, campaigned on promises of change, transparency, and economic reform. Led by Hubert Ingram, a former PLP member who had broken with Pindling, the FNM won a decisive victory. Pindling accepted defeat gracefully, declaring, "The people of this great little democracy have spoken in a most dignified and eloquent manner, and the voice of the people is the voice of God." The peaceful transfer of power demonstrated the maturity of Bahamian democracy. Pindling remained in Parliament as opposition leader until 1997, when he resigned from public life. When he died in August 2000, the nation mourned the loss of its founding father. Despite the controversies that had marked his later years, history remembers Pindling as the architect of modern Bahamas, the leader who ended centuries of colonial rule and racial disenfranchisement, who transformed a colony into a nation. The Bahamas that emerged in the late 20th century bore little resemblance to the colonial society of just decades earlier. 90% of the population was of African descent, and they now controlled their own destiny. The nation had achieved one of the highest standards of living in the Caribbean. Education was accessible to all. Healthcare, while imperfect, had improved dramatically. Infrastructure connected even remote islands to the broader national community. The economy had diversified beyond anyone's expectations in 1973. Tourism remained dominant, but financial services, light manufacturing, and other sectors contributed significantly. The Bahamas had become a major offshore financial center, with banking services rivaling much larger nations. Foreign investment flowed in, attracted by political stability and favorable business conditions. Bahamian culture flourished with independence. Junkanoo, the traditional Bahamian street parade, with its elaborate costumes, brass bands, and rhythmic drums, became a symbol of national identity. The festival, with roots in the days of slavery when the enslaved were given brief periods of freedom around Christmas, evolved into a spectacular celebration of Bahamian creativity and spirit. Artists, writers, and musicians found their voices in an independent nation that valued its unique cultural heritage. The nation faced ongoing challenges. Economic inequality persisted despite progress. Crime rates rose in some areas. Environmental pressures from development threatened the very natural beauty that attracted tourists. Climate change posed existential threats to low-lying islands, yet the Bahamas had proven its capacity to navigate difficulties while maintaining democratic governance and social stability. As the 21st century dawned, the Bahamas stood as a sovereign nation with a complex history and an uncertain but hopeful future. The journey from Lucayan civilization through colonial exploitation to modern independence had been long and often painful. The scars of slavery and colonialism remained visible in social and economic patterns, but the nation had also demonstrated remarkable resilience, the ability to transform itself peacefully, to expand opportunity, to build democratic institutions, and to claim its place in the world. The legacy of Lynden Pindling, like that of the nation he helped create, remains complex and multifaceted. He was neither saint nor villain, but a transformative leader who fundamentally altered the course of Bahamian history. The quiet revolution he led brought majority rule and independence, expanded opportunity and dignity to those long denied both, and created the foundation for a modern Bahamian nation. That the nation continues to grapple with challenges should surprise no one. All nations do. What matters is that Bahamians now face those challenges as free citizens of a sovereign state, masters of their own destiny, in a way their ancestors could only dream of. Chapter 6: Contemporary Bahamas, Culture, Economy and Future. As our journey through Bahamian history draws to a close, we arrive at the present, a nation of over 400,000 souls scattered across a scattered archipelago, a people who have inherited the legacy of Lucayans, enslaved Africans, British colonists, American Loyalists, and countless others who have shaped these islands. The contemporary Bahamas stands as a testament to resilience, adaptation, and the enduring human capacity to build something remarkable from a complex and often painful past. The Bahamas, today, is fundamentally an Afro-Caribbean nation. Approximately 90% of the population claims African descent, their ancestors having arrived in chains, yet leaving descendants who now govern their own country. This demographic reality shapes everything from political power to cultural expression, from cuisine to music, from language to spiritual practice. The Bahamas has become what the enslaved could only dream of, a nation where their descendants determine their own destiny. Yet the population is not monolithic. Significant communities of European descent remain, particularly descendants of Loyalist families who have been Bahamian for generations. Haitian immigrants and their Bahamian-born children form a substantial minority, adding French Creole to the linguistic landscape. Smaller communities from other Caribbean islands, North America, Europe, and Asia contribute to a multicultural society more diverse than simple statistics might suggest. What binds these groups together is a shared Bahamian identity forged through centuries of coexistence on these limestone islands. The Bahamian dialect of English reflects this cultural synthesis. It carries African linguistic patterns, British vocabulary, American influences from proximity to the United States, and indigenous words that survived the Lucayan genocide. The rhythm, the idioms, the very sound of Bahamian speech tells the story of cultural mixing and adaptation. To hear Bahamians speak is to hear history made audible. Bahamian culture finds its most vibrant expression in Junkanoo, that ecstatic celebration of music, dance, and visual spectacle that takes over the streets during the Christmas season and New Year's Day. Junkanoo's roots reach back to the days of slavery, when the enslaved were granted brief periods of freedom during the holidays. They used this time to celebrate in African traditions, drumming, dancing, wearing masks and costumes. Over centuries, Junkanoo evolved from these origins into a uniquely Bahamian art form. Modern Junkanoo groups spend months preparing elaborate costumes, massive constructions of cardboard, crepe paper, and imagination, depicting everything from underwater scenes to abstract designs to historical moments. The groups compete in organized parades, with brass sections, cowbells, and goatskin drums creating rhythms that pulse through Nassau's streets. Thousands participate, tens of thousands watch, and for those hours, the divisions of daily life dissolve in collective celebration. Junkanoo has become a symbol of Bahamian identity, a living tradition that connects contemporary Bahamians to their ancestors while creating something entirely their own. Music permeates Bahamian life beyond Junkanoo. Rake and scrape traditional Bahamian folk music played with a saw, goatskin drum, and accordion tells stories of fishing, sailing, and island life. Gospel music fills churches across the archipelago every Sunday, reflecting the deep religiosity of Bahamian society. The Bahamas has more churches per capita than nearly anywhere else on Earth, and faith remains central to community life. Contemporary Bahamian artists blend these traditional forms with reggae, calypso, hip-hop, and other genres, creating music that is both distinctly Bahamian and part of broader Caribbean and global conversations. Bahamian cuisine similarly reflects the nation's history and geography. Conch, that large sea snail pulled from the waters around the islands, appears in countless preparations. Conch salad, conch fritters, cracked conch, stewed conch. Each dish represents a different way of transforming this marine bounty into sustenance. Fish prepared a dozen ways graces Bahamian tables. Peas and rice, reminiscent of West African dishes yet transformed by local ingredients and preferences, serves as the foundation of countless meals. Johnny cakes, guava duff, and rock lobster round out a cuisine born of the sea, shaped by African cooking traditions and refined by generations of Bahamian cooks. The economy of the modern Bahamas rests primarily on two pillars: tourism and financial services. Tourism dominates, with over 7 million visitors arriving annually in recent years. The industry directly employs over half the workforce and generates more than 60% of GDP. Nassau and Paradise Island attract cruise passengers and resort guests seeking tropical luxury. Grand Bahama's Freeport welcomes tourists to its beaches and casinos. The Out Islands Abaco, Eleuthera, Exuma, and others market themselves to travelers seeking authentic experiences, bone fishing, diving, or simply escape from crowded resorts. The tourism model, while economically essential, creates challenges. The economy becomes vulnerable to external shocks, natural disasters, economic recessions in source countries, pandemics. The 2008 financial crisis significantly impacted visitor numbers. The devastation wrought by Hurricane Dorian in 2019 on Abaco and Grand Bahama demonstrated how vulnerable tourism infrastructure remains to natural disasters. The global pandemic beginning in 2020 brought tourism to a virtual standstill, revealing the risks of economic dependence on a single sector. Financial services form the second economic pillar. Nassau has become one of the world's leading offshore financial centers, with over 400 banks and trust companies operating under Bahamian jurisdiction. The sector benefits from political stability, favorable tax structures, modern regulatory frameworks, and proximity to the United States. Wealthy individuals and corporations use Bahamian trusts and banks for asset protection, estate planning, and international business operations. The industry employs thousands of Bahamians in high-skilled, well-paying positions and generates substantial government revenue. Yet the financial services sector faces its own pressures. International efforts to combat money laundering and tax evasion have forced the Bahamas to increase transparency and regulatory oversight. The nation must balance its competitive advantages with international compliance requirements. Maintaining reputation as a legitimate financial center while preserving the privacy and tax benefits that attract clients requires constant diplomatic and regulatory navigation. Beyond tourism and finance, the Bahamas has limited economic diversification. Light manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and some agricultural production exist, but at modest scales. The thin limestone soil that defeated plantation agriculture continues to limit farming potential. Fishing remains important to local communities and food security, but faces challenges from overfishing and environmental degradation. The government has made efforts to develop other sectors: technology, renewable energy, maritime services, but none have yet matched tourism and finance in economic significance. The contemporary Bahamas faces substantial challenges alongside its prosperity. Income inequality remains stark. While the nation boasts a high GDP per capita, wealth concentrates in Nassau and among certain economic groups. Many Bahamians struggle with the high cost of living on islands where most goods must be imported. Access to quality education and healthcare varies significantly between Nassau and the out islands. Young Bahamians often find limited opportunities beyond tourism and struggle to afford housing in their own country. Crime, particularly violent crime, has become a serious concern in recent decades. Gang activity, drug trafficking, and firearms have created violence rates troubling for a small nation. Nassau especially has grappled with murder rates that shock Bahamians and concern tourists. The government has responded with various initiatives: police reform, social programs, judicial reforms, but finding lasting solutions remains elusive. Environmental challenges loom large for a nation composed entirely of low-lying islands. Climate change poses an existential threat. Rising sea levels could render some islands uninhabitable within this century. Increased hurricane intensity threatens infrastructure and lives. Ocean acidification damages the coral reefs that protect coastlines and support marine life. The very natural beauty that attracts tourists faces degradation from development, pollution, and warming waters. The Bahamas has taken steps toward environmental protection. National parks protect critical habitats. Regulations limit coastal development in some areas. The nation has committed to renewable energy targets and participates in international climate agreements. Yet the fundamental tension remains economic development, particularly tourism development, often conflicts with environmental preservation. Finding sustainable balance becomes more urgent as climate impacts accelerate. Despite these challenges, the Bahamas demonstrates remarkable strengths. Democratic institutions, while imperfect, function effectively. Peaceful transfers of power occur regularly. The Free National Movement and Progressive Liberal Party alternate governance, with voters determining outcomes through free and fair elections. Civil society organizations advocate for various causes. The press operates freely. The rule of law generally prevails. For a small developing nation, the Bahamas has achieved notable political stability and democratic governance. The Bahamian people show extraordinary resilience. Hurricane Dorian in 2019 devastated Abaco and Grand Bahama with sustained winds of 185 miles per hour, one of the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes on record. The destruction was catastrophic. Yet Bahamians, with support from international partners, began rebuilding immediately. Communities that had been flattened started to rise again. This resilience, born of centuries of surviving storms, both meteorological and historical, remains a defining Bahamian characteristic. The Bahamian diaspora connects the islands to the wider world. Thousands of Bahamians live abroad, particularly in the United States, sending remittances home and maintaining family connections. They serve as cultural ambassadors, economic links, and sources of knowledge and skills. Many return home after education or careers abroad, bringing expertise to benefit the nation. This transnational community strengthens the Bahamas while also creating brain drain challenges. Looking toward the future, the Bahamas stands at a crossroads. The economic model that brought prosperity in recent decades faces pressures requiring adaptation. Climate change demands urgent action and international cooperation. Social challenges require renewed commitment to equity and opportunity, yet the foundations exist for meeting these challenges. The nation possesses educated citizens, democratic institutions, natural beauty, strategic location, and accumulated experience in navigating difficult waters. Innovation offers pathways forward. Renewable energy could reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels while addressing climate concerns. Technology sectors could diversify the economy. Sustainable tourism models could preserve environmental assets while generating revenue. Regional cooperation through CARICOM and other organizations could amplify Bahamian influence and create new opportunities. Investment in education and training could prepare Bahamians for changing economic realities. The Bahamas of tomorrow will be shaped by decisions made today. Will the nation find ways to share prosperity more equitably? Can environmental sustainability be reconciled with economic development? Will democratic institutions strengthen or weaken? Can Bahamian culture thrive in an increasingly globalized world? These questions have no simple answers, but they will determine what kind of nation the next generation inherits. As you drift towards sleep, reflect on this remarkable archipelago we have explored together, from limestone platforms rising from ancient seas, to Lucayan villages scattered across islands, to the horrors of slavery and colonization, through pirate republics and rum running, to the quiet revolution that brought majority rule and independence. The Bahamas has lived a history as dramatic as any nation's. 700 islands, holding 400,000 people, yet punching far above their weight in cultural influence, economic achievement, and sheer determination to write their own story. The Bahamas is more than a tropical paradise for tourists, more than offshore banks and cruise ships, more than the sum of its economic statistics. It is a nation forged in struggle, built on hope, sustained by resilience. It is Junkanoo rhythms echoing through Nassau streets at dawn, fishermen heading out before sunrise, students walking to schools built because people fought for education as a right, families gathering for Sunday dinner of peas and rice and fresh fish, and always, always, the sea, that endless turquoise expanse that defines, surrounds, sustains, and sometimes threatens these islands. The story of the Bahamas reminds us that nations, like individuals, are works in progress. They carry their histories in their DNA while constantly evolving. They face challenges that seem insurmountable yet somehow survive. They are capable of both terrible injustice and remarkable grace. The Bahamas has been all of this victim and victor, oppressed and free, dependent and sovereign, and so we close our journey where we began, on islands scattered across 100,000 square miles of ocean, where the water runs so clear you can see 200 feet into the depths, where blue holes plunge into darkness holding ancient secrets, where barrier reefs teem with life, where flamingos paint the sky pink, and where people descendants of countless origins have built something uniquely theirs. The Bahamas, in all its complexity and beauty, stands as testament to the human capacity to create meaning, build community, and persist against all odds. May this little nation continue its journey with wisdom, justice, and hope. Rest well, and may your dreams carry you across these crystalline waters to shores where history and future meet.